I think it's time to open the floor for questions from the audience, and there should be a microphone somewhere coming around. Here it's coming. So if you would like to ask a question, I see a lot of people here. So I'll start with the front row. Krista Byqvist. Keep your hands up a little bit more.
Well, thank you. That was very interesting, all three comments here. So I'm a little bit confused because, I mean, your thesis is very weak, as I said, right? Let's explore the possibility of bioenhancement. Who would deny that under some reading, right? I mean, yeah, if it doesn't cost much, yeah, why not? If it costs a lot and we have to make a priority, then I guess you get into the question, well, we could explore something else. We could explore political change without changing people's motivation, perhaps keeping them selfish, but let's see if we can make the world better, even though some people are selfish. So we think about ways to motivate them from their selfish perspectives, and the outcome will be morally better, right? That's another thing you can do. Or you can think about the cognitive enhancement of the beliefs, right? Or you can think about what kind of morality do we need to enhance? Because it's not like we agree on how much sacrifice each of us should make in order for other people to flourish. We don't agree on that at all. So my question to you, Julian, is that how much priority should we give to this kind of exploration compared to these other ways of enhancing and changing people to the better, or changing the world to the better place?
I think massive priority, because basically all the effort is going into funding programs on social and political reform that have pretty much manifestly failed. So we're also backing a number of horses in this race with a lot of money, and we're spending virtually zero on this issue. Now, I agree with you, we need a massive investment in philosophy to try to understand how much inequality there should be, what level of sacrifice there should be, what are the moral goals that we should be aiming for. Those are the most important questions we face. And basically, nothing is spent on those. And then we need a science to tell us how we would make progress towards those, a science of morality. So I think that's the most important research project there is. So if there are any donors in the audience, I think the Institute for Future Studies could easily do with more money for this topic.
Thank you for that.
So then the reason for that is that it's, if you've got horses in a race, you don't back, if you don't have to back a single horse, you back them all until you know who's the winner. And nothing is spent on understanding essentially nothing is spent on understanding our moral psychology and our moral nature compared to how much we spend on new statin drugs or, a new intervention to keep people alive for another 6 months, or on, how to reform the political system. So I think it should be a much greater priority. But, regardless, investing in what we should be aiming for morally would inform our education system. Gustaf and I were saying, what sort of moral education should children have? Okay, certainly not a religious education, which is what they've had. That's not going to be answered by talking about social and political reform. It's going to be talking about what is the kind of morality we want people to have. So I think that is an incredibly important research priority, and even if you don't buy the science bit of understanding our moral psychology, you think that it's too impenetrable, too difficult, the market will deal with it, or we can harness people's self-interest in some way. I personally think that's wrong. I think what you've seen now is a failure of the market. If you look at the US and the sort of spread of obesity and levels of inequality, you see a market operating with selfish people who will exploit each other. It's just inevitable with a market. So maybe we should rethink what sort of goal we want.
Okay, so we have 2 questions up there. First, the lady. Yeah.
Hello. I just wanted, there's a Dutch saying that goes, when the shit falls on the CEO's hat, something will happen. And 2 words haven't been mentioned here, and that is fear, and that is inertia. Inertia, that's the way we have been doing it. We're going on doing it just like we've always done things. And then, the thing number 2, fear, is, I mean, if there are going to be some more Katrinas, some more droughts, like in California, for instance, and well, some more heat waves and real nasty heat waves, things should eventually happen, because, I mean, fear is a mighty power to make people rethink. And I hope on fear. You haven't been mentioning fear.
Well, I was only given 45 minutes, and it's just a sketch of a sort of an idea that Krista rightly said is very thin. I think what in practice will happen is nothing will be done. There will be some kind of major catastrophic event, and then people will say, what can we do about this? That's the way people have what's called the status quo bias. They're very biased towards the way things are. They don't like to see what they think is going to be significant radical change. And it takes a major event to shake them up. So I agree that that we don't have fear because we don't understand probability. We don't understand things which aren't immediately in front of us. So people don't fear climate change because it's just not real to them. Yeah, well, they're very secure in their lives today. So it's of course there's no motivation to change.
Can I fill in there? I
Yeah,
mean,
sure.
I think if you look at the younger generation, there's a great deal of fear, actually, and I can see it in my daughters. But I think again, and there's a willingness to try to do something that you don't see in our generation as much. But I think again, you have a fundamental problem, which is basically the sort of weakness of will problem that human beings always face. You can fear that you will die from the fact that you smoke or don't go to the gym and so on, and you will still keep on smoking and not go to the gym because there are other desires that will compete and will stop you from doing the thing that would actually help prevent what you fear. So human beings are complex. So even if people do fear, it's very hard to get them motivated to do the right thing.
Thank you. I'm glad you quoted Margaret Thatcher's famous saying that there's no such thing as a society, because I think maybe it reveals some of the political inclinations or biases of your project. I'm curious, though, I noticed that the subtitle of your book was the need for moral enhancement, whereas the subtitle of your book on your slide is presented as the need for moral bioenhancement. And I was wondering if you could care to comment on the conceptual slippage, if that's intentional. Do you see bioenhancement and enhancement as equivalent entities?
Can I just answer that question quickly?
Sure.
Well, moral enhancement is completely uncontroversial. That's why I put bioenhancement, because I wanted to give you just at least something to disagree with. Because moral enhancement is education. Our whole society is built on moral improvement or reaching some kind of moral state. So it's the bio bit that people disagree with. No one disagrees with moral enhancement through political reform.
So one person's moral enhancement could easily be another person's dystopic future. Who is to decide whether a moral bioenhancement is administered? What's to prevent it from devolving into essentially can easily imagine a situation like in the Soviet Union where the state administers biomedical enhancements that encourages workers to act as Stakhanovite laborers.
I
envision mechanisms.
Yeah, I don't have time to give all my arguments against moral relativism, but what we tried to do in this book was pick the low-hanging fruit. I think not everyone, but most people agree that a massive bioterrorist event that killed hundreds of millions of people is something we should avoid. Most people would agree that the level of inequality and poverty in the world is a bad thing and we ought to try to alleviate that. Most people would agree that catastrophic climate change is something that we ought to avoid. So if you just take those things as being bad, then you can work backwards from that and say, well, what would be necessary to reduce the chances of those kinds of events? Now, do we become good Kantians or good consequentialists, or what specific virtues do we want people to have? Those are much more controversial questions, which I think we should be looking at. We should try to make progress on that. But we needn't wait for the resolution of that debate to say, well, you know, creating smallpox artificially is a bad thing. How can we avoid that? So again, that's just low-hanging fruit. I agree, the real debate is going to be, you know, how much weight do we give to liberty over well-being? How much weight do we give to, you know, freedom, you know, over security? You know, all of these sorts of debates I think are very difficult and interesting and fundamentally philosophical, not scientific. And there aren't clear answers to them. But we needn't wait to decide that in order to try to make progress on some pretty big problems we face.
Okay, more questions, and next on the list is me, but then you. I'll take the opportunity to ask a question. Getting back to this discussion between you and Göran, and also Gustaf was there, you had this discussion quoting Thatcher, there's only individuals, no society, and whether everything stems from the individual. It kind of goes back to an old discussion about methodological individualism, and everything can be explained by just looking at individuals. I don't think you need to kind of climb out on a limb there. I mean, quite trivially, we act in a structure. We live in a certain society with certain laws and habits and things like that. One trivial example, sometimes we live in a democracy, sometimes we live in a dictatorship, so some are unfortunate to do that. And this different structure might be more or less good at weeding out or stopping people with bad behavior. So it might be that one advantage with this kind of thin liberal democracy is that it's hard for a psychopath to stay in power for too long because people can throw out a psychopath. Whereas in a dictatorship, it's very hard to get rid of a psychopath. That is one way, and a very simple example, how you can arrange society structurally to promote good behavior and avoid bad behavior. So that would I guess, not be in, I think, any kind of opposition to your project. So rather, there is no real disagreement, I think, between you and Göran. Of course, one thing that's good with democracy, I just mentioned that it can get rid of bad leaders, might be one thing that's now also a problem because we elect our leaders every 4th or 5th year, and we don't get this kind of long perspective we need. But that can also be not only solved by some kind of moral enhancement, be it bioenhancement or honor enhancement, but perhaps also by changing the structure, by having some kind of representative for future generations. So I think, why shouldn't we just realize that we should go? There's both structure to change and perhaps to change people.
Well, of course, you should use everything available to you and choose the course that's most likely to realise the goal that you want. So I completely agree with you that you could change the terms of government straight away. I don't know what it is in Sweden, say from 3 or 5 years to 10 years. And then you could make long-term policies that involve sacrifices now for benefits later. That would be, you know, a social change. Or you could modify people to more accurately be able to imagine the future. So it was more vivid to them than it is now. Both of these might influence people's willingness to make plans for the longer-term future. Which of those you choose will depend on the requirements of justice, risks and benefits, you know, other costs and so on. So, you know, so again, you can make somebody's life with deafness better by everyone learning to sign, or by giving them a hearing aid, or, you know, a cochlear implant. So which of those you choose will depend on the reason. So and again, this. Of course, we were going to need social change. I think, you know, there's just no way that any kind of direct biological intervention could achieve anything by itself, short of this sort of scenario that was presented with the Colin Firth method. But the question is, you know, the standard view is that we should only pursue social and political change because humans are good enough. That's what John Harris, sufficient to have stood, that humans are good enough. It's the same in the genetic selection and design a baby debate. People say it's fine to select against diseases, but selecting for non-disease traits, that's out. You've got to leave that to nature. And the fundamental divide is between people who say, we're good enough as it is, that humans, you know, as a species or across the whole population are good enough we just need social change, or we just need to get things right. And then the people like me who say, no, it's not good enough. Part of the problem is is inherent inequality, biological inequality between human beings. Now that's the big division, that's the sort of real joint that matters. And of course we will have social reform is also important, but the difference are people who say the only thing that you should do is change society, not change people.
So it might not be...
Peer society is people, just mind you.
Well, in this, I mean, it's at the individual level.
There is no difference. Society is made up of people. People make society. Human beings have the really remarkable ability to build fantastic society, huge civilizations, very complicated, and it has the same ability to destroy them by themselves. They have done that. Maybe the one thing goes with the other. We don't know. Maybe we should stop being able to build nicer civilization and go on drugs. But we have to be careful when we try to see the interplay between human as an individual, a thinking, self-reflecting individual, and the societies she is able to build. And just to talk about society as something exterior of human beings is not conducive to anything, I think.
Will you have a quick comeback to that, or let another question in?
Okay.
So you have a question there?
Yeah, I can.
Where's the... Oh, you
Yes.
have the microphone. Okay, go for it.
Okay, so there was something that you mentioned very briefly, and it was this Ritalin that some of us already have. You said to me it was sort of controversial that women are already on Ritalin. So we have this sort of humans that have Ritalin that are affected by this moral drug already. So maybe I got you wrong there, but are you talking more about men? Are you more focused on men than women?
No. I mean, the Ritalin is meant to apply to both men and women. Sorry.
Yeah.
No, you're right. This is a cognitive and moral enhancer that 10% of children are on now. So when you talk about this, people say, oh, it's impossible, we've got to change society or we've got to do other things. This is an example, in my view, of a modern moral enhancer.
Right.
That
But you said
I think is very, provided the side effect profile is favourable, I think is a very interesting way in which we're going already.
Yeah, but I think it was interesting that you said that putting people on this drug would mean that they would be more like women.
Oh, no, sorry. I was saying if you happened to increase the level of empathy and sympathy of men to the level of women, this would be, that's not Ritalin, this would be a moral enhancement, but it doesn't make them less free. The argument that I was trying to address was this argument that by changing people, right, rather than just providing them with arguments or information or new laws or incentives, by changing their internal motivations or attitudes or something internal to themselves, you're undermining their freedom. And I said, if you made men more empathetic like women, this wouldn't make them less free because we don't say women are less free. But Ritalin acts in a different way. It doesn't affect empathy, it affects self-control.
Can I just follow? I mean, obviously we can morally enhance people now, like you've been saying, and it's very, very plausible that we can do this in a much more efficient way within a short time. But there are two questions here that we have to keep distinct. No doubt, we can morally enhance people, we can soon do that, and it will make for a nicer society, a better society in many ways. Will it solve the very huge, large problems of global warming and so on? I rather doubt it, which again, to solve that, we would really, again, have limitations in the individual rights and in so on and so forth. Will it be worth it unless we think it will actually prevent ultimate harm? That I think is a distinct question. So.
What is moral enhancement? I just want to get a grip in your view. What is it?
Well, let's just take a view of morality such as consequentialism, and we can get people to act so that things have better consequences.
More altruistic.
More altruistic. So I think that wouldn't be too hard to do. If people, for example, there is evidence that a lot of these sort of young men who are drawn to extremist terrorist actions have a history of psychological and anger management problems and so on. You could help. You could fix that.
Like in Clockwork Orange, I mean.
No, well, yeah, I'm saying you could fix that. Well, you should do it. We can discuss. What I was saying is that that is not the real issue here. Whether this is something that could happen and maybe should happen, it's already happening in certain cases here. it's distinct from the other question.
Okay, next question.
I will comment two statements from Julian and Göran. I agree that a single person can influence. I agree that if Al Gore has won the president election, it has been a bit different. And I also think that if the Versailles Treaty after the First War, if the Americans were very quick to leave Europe, and France and England was very eager to make this treatment. And also another statement from Göran. You compared Sweden and Germany. I'm not so proud of Sweden in the 30s. You know, Sweden started the Ras Biologiska Institute in Uppsala, and also they refused, I think, 20 Jewish doctors to come to Sweden.
Yeah, but that still turned out differently. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. There are similarities. This is my point. But still, two different kind of societies emerged. So.
And was there a question to Julian there too, or?
I just commented those.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. I think we have time for a last question. There.
You talk about moral enhancement, and I think it's very hard to discuss that without discussing the role of religion, because from what I understand, is as long as people think that there exists a divine law opposed to human law, I don't think that you can, which makes that the moral enhancement looks different in different culture. What's the point? I don't think you can get a trust without, as long as religion has such a strong grip on people, because divine law is very dangerous.
Well, there are some principles that cut across religions and plausible secular versions of morality. So one is the Kantian categorical imperative, or the golden rule, or to treat others as you would have them treat yourself, to universalize, to imagine yourself as being, you know, each person affected by an action, and take an impartial perspective about what action you endorse. This is a kind of characteristic way of thinking that cuts across both religion and dominant utilitarian and also Kantian ways of thinking. So maybe one way of making progress is to try to identify some core. But I agree with you that there will be features of each religion which are particular that can't be shared by everyone, and that is a major problem. And I think the greatest challenge that we face today, getting back to Krista's point, is to arrive at a defensible common human morality, something that we can educate the next generation with, that isn't just neutral to different conceptions of morality, but that picks out certain sorts of characteristics.
Well, on that note, I'm afraid we have to wrap up this seminar because the time is out. So please join me and thank the speaker, Professor Julian Savulescu, the commentator, Wikforss, and Göran Rosenberg.